Okay, so look, we have the drawing tools available, so there might be some instances where you might be asked to use your tools to indicate your choices, etc. Um, we do have a back channel, and it's at LRN the hashtag that you want to use is learning analytics. So hashtag learning analytics. Plus, there is the chat box that I just typed in. Please feel to have a conversation amongst yourselves. If you want to ask questions to the panelists, or but also have a discussions just amongst yourselves. I know that somebody like hey Lynn, yeah, Lynn's pretty Lynn Paul. Please do use the chat box and have a conversation there. Okay, so let's make a start. It is a great pleasure. I actually really happy to introduce Vanessa Blewett. So Vanessa, welcome back to to Learning Cafe. Vanessa is the global transformation lead for learning intelligence and effectiveness. She's probably the only person, Vanessa, that I know who has that title anywhere in the world. So congratulations. And Vanessa we're very fortunate to have Vanessa because Vanessa has done a lot of been doing traveling a lot. So lucky to get her today in Sydney. So Vanessa, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
And also my pleasure to introduce Sarajit. Sarajit, again, thank you very much because Sarajit is actually based in Singapore. So it's not too early, but early in the morning for Sarajit. And Sarajit comes from a slightly different angle in terms of he's really an expert in workforce planning and analytics. And what he's decided to do is kind of focus his lenses on learning. Sarajit's been working for Ericsson for quite some time and has been working in this space. So quite interested in hearing Sarajit's view. And finally, myself, as you know, I've kind of got a view on things on learning, and I'll be presenting that, at the end. We had more than 100 registrations from 62 plus organizations. The names are there, so thank you very much for registering. People who are missing out will get a link to the recording if they have registered for the webinar. So for those who are not aware of Learning Cafe and Capability Cafe, and there are actually not many in the audience because I can see a lot of familiar faces, but essentially it's a community of professionals interested in learning and capability. And the way that this community gets together is um, is through unconferences, webinars like this one. We run one every month. Thought leadership, coffee catch-ups, blog magazine, and our annual unconference in Sydney and Melbourne. We kind of reworking the unconference this year because while it consistently has rated 4.2 out of 5 at least over the past 6-7 years. We thought it was time to change the format and make it a little bit more hands-on. So please watch out for that date sometime in September. Um, this webinar is about about learning analytics, but we do have a lot of content on other things, including workshops on what we call the next gen learning skills, including agile for learning, content curation learning, which we are planning to run in Melbourne very soon, and which ran in Sydney and was quite successful. We had people from 10 organizations, and actually this will be version 2 of the course. It'll be improved. Um, Foundations of capability management, blended learning, etc. Just go to our website, look up the workshop menu, and you will see the whole list there. And just register your interest, and we will definitely organize the workshops, kind of demand-led workshops in Sydney and Melbourne mostly, but also potentially Brisbane. Um, so have a look, please. So let's share some statistics with you. Actually, before I do that, I do want to talk about the next webinar. If you want to tell your HR friends, but also everybody in learning, we'll be doing a series about rebooting HR for the future of work. And if you looked up LinkedIn, there seems to be a lot of chatter about why HR is dead and how HR is not value adding and it needs to change. So we kind of we'll just explore that and look at the different aspects. We're just having a chat before all of you joined. With Sarajit and Vanessa about the need for HR to do things differently and what's stopping them. So the first one series is the problems of the old HR operating system. So we think that there needs to be a new operating system. So we look at the problems with the old operating system because we are living in a different world. So that's Thursday, 29th March, 1 to 2 p.m. So same time as now. The link is there, but you can also go to Capability Cafe and register for that. But I'm also, going to pass on the link. So if you just want to register for that, good. Now let's have a look at some of the statistics that we got from the survey that you filled out. The first question we asked was, what is your level of satisfaction with the learning data that's available to you? And my apologies for actually giving one of the choices as unsatisfied, which is not an English word, although it sounds like a good word, but should have been dissatisfied. So looking at the two extremes, dissatisfied, 38% are dissatisfied, 51% are okay, only 10% are happy or very happy, right? So it's it is a big chunk of people who are currently unhappy with the kind of learning data that's available to them. And I think we'll kind of explore a little bit more in the presentation by Vanessa and Sarajit as to how we could fix that. But the world that I see around me, learning data mostly comprises of completion data from LMSs. Getting any other learning data is extremely difficult and is not robust enough. So I think that might be part of the reason why there is dissatisfaction. This question was interesting, the results, where I asked what was the most important aspect of learning data that they were interested in. And 50% said organizational learning patterns. I was very impressed with that particular number, and it'll be quite interesting. Maybe we can have a discussion about how do you recognize learning patterns and learning patterns within, I guess, a limited data we have, and what do we need to do to recognize those learning patterns. 30% said knowledge gaps, and again, great result. Only 16% said completion data, but I was a little concerned because only 5% were kind of interested in learner dynamics, i.e., when are learners learning, how much time are they spending, etc. So I might actually just check with Vanessa first, and then Sarajit, about their views on this particular slide, where completion data surprising was only 16%, but a lot of learning analytics seems to be around completion data. So Vanessa, over to you for your views on this.
In terms of what I see, I would say that we actually invest quite heavily on completion data. For example, it's something that we need to report externally to our shareholders in terms of what is the investment that we're making in our employees and their development. I would be interested to see the difference between knowledge gaps being a priority and it actually being measured, because it's something that we are doing in a limited space, but I actually think it's quite difficult. I think performance gaps are more interesting. Learning patterns, it's interesting again. What are we actually tracking? Are we tracking people accessing e-learning or attending classes? So if that's what we're talking about, I think it's a tricky one to pen in. And learner dynamics, again, I think this comes into the 70-20-10 space and where we're comfortable to play. So personally, I'm spending a lot of time looking at what happens, I guess, around structured development solutions, because it's a space that we can control and have visibility of. And then I see once we have the pull and appetite, we'll be able to move into the space of what's happening organically into a 70. But I think that's extremely difficult.
Sure. Sarajit, what about you, especially since you're kind of coming from the entire workforce analytics? Any comments on this slide?
Yeah, actually, in the application of analytics to any field, we need to ask the question, what are we going to achieve by this application? And I can see that from this survey, the results looks encouraging, because if, let's say, the organization is looking into understanding the learning patterns, the outcome could be that what kind of pattern is catered towards a specific business need. For example, if there is a capability that is lacking in a particular business segment, or there is a skill that is required to be addressed in near future and things like that, for that we have to understand the patterns, right? And if, let's say, the focus is on the knowledge gap, of course this is what we are going to address, or we're trying to address. And if, let's say, the focus is there, then I see this very encouraging. But having said that, I think there is a place for everything, the proactive analytics or predictive analytics versus reactive analytics. For example, we need to know whether, there are ample takers of a learning program in the organization or not, whether people are interested in investing their time in learning programs or not. So while that is important, that should not be the final goal. The final goal should be that what impact the learning programs are going to make. I see that the trend is there on the positive side, and I also see that they are not losing out on the basics, the fundamentals that we need to track as well.
Thank you very much, both. So just moving on to the next slide, and this one's an interesting one because almost anything we discussed in L&D, there seems to be a skill gap, including data skills. So the question we asked and was, do you think the L&D professionals have good data skills? And essentially only 5% said good skills, 19% said adequate, 49% said some, and and 27% said very little. So I think if this is a representative of an average skill base across L&D, there is a bit of work to do. On the other hand, just back to you, Vanessa, first, is that does analytics then become a specialist role, like something like you're doing, and something like you're doing, and not everybody in L&D needs to be, well, they don't need to be very bad, but if they kind of got adequate skills, that should be more than adequate, because they can always come to people like yourselves. So Vanessa, what do you think?
I think the definition of adequate is interesting. So for me, what is adequate? From our own organisation, I can say that Insights Advocate is actually one of our HR competencies that we expect all of our HR professionals to have. So those insights could be market-based, and they should also be data-based. And as we were talking before the call, it is a concern for me, and it is skill that I believe HR people and L&D need to develop, is looking at insights and understanding how they apply not just to their immediate role and scope, but also how it applies to the business and having that business sensibility. So for me, adequate would probably be is higher than minimum, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I expect to have, and yes, someone who can mine the data deeper and guide people, but I actually think that we need an uplift in skill across the board.
Absolutely. We've got a good question from Madhulika. When do people go for various learning requirements? And I think we'll discuss that a little bit later, because that's a really interesting question, and I haven't, at least in my journeys, seen anybody do a decent job. But we'll wait to hear from the presenters after some time. But I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa. So Vanessa, over to you. Please feel free to navigate the slides.
Thank you. Good afternoon for most people, I hope. Good afternoon, everybody. Vanessa, and as Jivan said, I've actually just come back from 2 weeks in Switzerland, so it's good timing to share with you what it is that we're up to. So I guess I wanted to take a moment or two to first set the scene of, I guess, where I'm coming from. Firstly, it's L&D is a means to an end. It's not the end. And, it's like the quote, to a man with a hammer, everything's a nail. And this is a concern that I see in my own organisation. As L&D people, we have to accept and understand that the solution to everything is not learning and development. Taking that wider view, it could be performance related, it could be motivation, it could be org structure, it could be a number of elements, and that's why I like hearing some people who talk about performance consultancy. So first of all, before we can have, I guess, meaningful analytics, we want to make sure that learning was the right solution up front. And the end is actually results for the business. And when I say business, I'm referring to individuals, teams, and organisations. And as Jivan said, I'll get more specific on what I mean by results as well. Our focus, or my focus, as you saw, is learning that delivers tangible business value. So tangible does not mean return on investment calculations. It means impact that matters. So we'll talk about that as well. And also including data-driven insights to inform decisions and actions. And at the end of the day, that's really our touch point. We want our business to be getting information about what's happening in their learning and development space that they can use to continue to drive the business forward. Our journey, as a brief overview, was that pre-2015, we were a typical organisation, and that means that around 10% of people arrived at training, in inverted commas, with an understanding of what was expected. The main way we demonstrated value was to show satisfaction scores and lots of efficiency data, seats available, seats filled, completion rates, all of that sort of stuff. And to be transparent, that is how it still is in many parts of our business. In 2015-16, and I've talked about this in webinars before, we pioneered and piloted in our International Training Centre a learning effectiveness framework and an approach, which we went live with for all of the solutions. So it's around 2,500 participants a year in 2017. So throughout that year, we collected analytics and data, and you'll see some examples of that as well. We now are on a global transformation journey across our whole business, including the area that I work in, which is Enable and Grow. So we are taking our approach global. That means we've had to apply scale and scope to that as well. So of course, not all development solutions are created equal, and we don't want to be heavy-handed with the insights that we collect when it's not balanced with the strategic value of the solution. So I'll cover that off a little bit as well. And actually, I was just there working with IT specialists, with business intelligence people, with our people analytics team to look at ways to industrialize the data we're getting today. The way we get it today is through surveys and our learning management system, and there is a lot of downloading to Excel files and a lot of manual manipulation that we've now improved with macros. We've also added some bots to that process to make it faster, but now we're looking at using tools such as xAPI and Power BI over the top of that to make the reporting more accessible. So you can see there, sorry I didn't know I had a slide build, so you can see what success looked like. Now we focus on learning journeys where we have a pre, during and post phase. We have processes and measures that support all of those. We're focused on why and what results. So by why, I mean things like what were the opportunities learners had to apply learning on the job, what were the challenges that they faced, were action plans completed. So we seek to tell a whole story. We don't just look and say, here were the gaps that were closed, here was their satisfaction score. In order to continuously improve or to get to the impact that matters, we need to have an understanding of what happened. And in terms of for all development solutions, starting from 2018 for the areas of our business going live, at a minimum, we will be capturing a reaction score, e.g. a star rating, application on the job, which is actually through a single click. We just ask, I didn't try to apply learning on the job, I did apply learning on the job, and did it add value to their ways of working? So yes, it is self-assessed, but at the end of the day, that's step one. And we didn't try and get super scientific. We are self-reporting if that learning added value. And to be honest, if we get those 3 insights for all of our development solutions, we will be much further down the line than we are today. As a numbers example, in the UK market, we have 9,000 development solutions registered in our learning management system. And I would have no idea what the feedback was in terms of how much of those result in application on the job and how many of those are adding value in the eyes of the people investing in them. As I said, I've just come back from doing what we called a hackathon, where we're looking at industrialized insights. So building things like BW cubes for anyone who's techie in the room, so that we can quite quickly slice and dice and see our data at a global level, at a regional level, and at an individual country level as well. And that's designed to... Sorry, yes.
Jeevani, just a question on the industrialized insights where you're kind of building the cubes.
Yes. Yep.
Where did you get the data from? So obviously there's learning data. What are the other sources?
We use a system called Cornerstone On Demand as our learning management system.
Yeah.
And that fulfills many of our needs. We also are xAPI users, although in this instance our xAPI data about employees is also captured in our learning management system. And for most of our learning, we also use the survey functionality in Cornerstone. For our richer learning experiences, those with high strategic value, it actually does not meet our needs because of the functionality. That said, they are aware of our strategy, and as a vendor, they are working with us to meet those requirements. So we had a vendor and client meeting, which included people like T-Mobile, Airbus in the UK, and they agreed that what we're trying to do is what they should be working towards.
Vanessa,
So we use a survey tool called Opinio. So just two data sources.
Right. And look, Murray's asked a question. So when you're finished presenting, if you can just respond to Murray about the tools used. But I just want to check, you kind of said, you talked about rating the, training program, star rating. Have you considered using NPS or Net Promoter Score for?
We do, and you will see that.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
Yep. The reason we use star rating is because it is standard functionality in Cornerstone. So it's very easy just to get one click at the end of the experience. For Net Promoter Score, we reserve it for our higher value development solutions. Part of the reason for limiting it, to be honest, is that there is a great misunderstanding about what the Net Promoter Score is or how to calculate it. And Cornerstone, I don't think does a good calculation of it. So it is actually something that we have to calculate manually when we do use it. So that's why. And the insights are being used to design and deliver learning, and we have examples in our business already about how insights are feeding back into our design and delivery process to make sure learning does get applied, in particular on the job. And the business is using it to plan, prepare, and participate. For example, we ask questions about alignment, so how aligned is a particular solution to development goals of our learners. We used a survey tool to set an expected development gap closure up front and to see the gap closure at the end, which actually really speaks a lot to our executive team in particular. But we can also go all the way down to an objective level for a development solution. And our L&D teams are rebalancing some of those solutions to say we need to focus more in this area because we see development gaps aren't being closed here, or we need to look at other ways to support application of learning on the job to close those particular gaps. So getting some, in a relatively simple way, some quite powerful insights. What you have on screen here, and I apologise, it's a little small, is an example of the current high-level reporting that we are providing to our senior executives. So one thing to point out is that the focus is on development solutions. So we're not looking at what people do independently on the job. So I guess we have it boxed in, if you like. And this example is our International Training Centre. So that's why the numbers you can see are relatively small. We are reporting on learning journeys, which is part of that whole message we're trying to get out to people, is to change the mindset that training is not an event that you tick off on your calendar. It is something that requires preparation, and it is something that requires follow-up on the job, because the best experience in the world will have no impact, obviously, if learning's not actually applied. So our reporting here is based on where the journey has ended, and we've done some follow-up with those learners. We de-emphasise reaction scores, that's why they're down the bottom, and Jivan, you can see our Net Promoter Score being used there. And one thing I really emphasise with the business is there's research that talks about how Net Promoter Scores vary across different countries. So the way people use this culturally can be quite different. So we track trends specific to an individual solution, and we're quite mindful of that, because trying to compare scores directly is problematic because it depends on who's rating them. So we see differences there. And we do obviously provide a different level of detail for stakeholders. So here, just to point out, you can see we are reporting on completed learning journeys. So that's saying already to drive some behaviour change, that age-old challenge of getting survey responses. This data is reporting on 41% of our participants, which is actually quite high in the general scheme of things. What that means is that they told us what their goals were before they came, and they told us where they got to 100 days after they left. So when I have both pieces of those that puzzle, I can complete this report for them. And for that community, half of the gaps that they said they had, I'm at point A, I want to get to B, were closed. 58% of those gaps were closed. We split it by function to create a little bit of competition, and generally HR is the worst, I'm afraid to say. We track alignment, so how close was this development solution to what I think I needed, which is also really important. So it is a high strategic value, so lots of learning being applied on the job and lots of value being added. And the classic overall appraisal scores, our executive are quite wedded to that figure, and the net promoter score. So that's just, and this all breaks down, as I said, to an individual development objective level for the people who are delivering and designing those programs. Just looking at some questions here. Performance management to capability and performance. No, we actually track to Pablo. Our competency frameworks are stored in success factors, and they are not yet up and running for all of our functions. So we're not tracking that there. And in our factory environments, we actually use Six Sigma. Able to do some learning forecast. Not focused on predictive analytics at this stage. What we're really focused on is driving the behaviors of getting people to see learning as a journey. And I know even when people enjoy the experience, myself as a guilty party, we go back to work and don't focus on applying the learning. Are self-assessed. At this stage, yes, all of these measures are self-assessed as a collaboration between the learner and the line manager when it comes to what the opening gap is. So that users actually, we use competency proficiency levels as a metric, as a guideline, and they say what is the starting point and the target up front, and together they assess the result at the end. Now, this is because Jivan and I were talking, we could get into circular arguments forever and a day about what else was the change in performance and, you know, what were the other contributing factors and what happens in different environments. And what this is really about is we actually get learners and their line managers to give examples of what they will do, say, and achieve on the job if that learning is being successfully applied and achieving the target results. That's because just having the numbers and having straight up tick boxes, we find doesn't generate the right level of motivation and engagement, and it doesn't recognize the different career stages or roles or contexts of individual learners. And so by getting people to specify that also drives the behavior to identify opportunities on the job and creates that ownership. And at the end of the day, to be honest, what we are asked for is to demonstrate that the business feels learning is tangibly adding value and that performance gaps or development gaps are getting closed. And that feeds into our wider performance personal development planning. So we're not trying to supersede that or replace it. We're actually integrated into it in that development solutions are identified as an outcome of the performance planning process, and they are assessed as a contributing factor in the performance review, which as part of periodic check-ins. So we don't seek to independently separate learning linked to performance any more than you see here. Sorry, just looking, David Hegarty, the input from the line manager means there is connection. Correct, absolutely. So the learner and the line manager up front say, you're currently on our proficiency scale of 2. We expect you, after you apply this learning, to get to a 4. And remember, this is just for high strategic value where we expect there to be impact at that kind of clear level. And not just those numbers, but to say, what does that actually look like for you in your job right now? And then they will review that approximately 3 months after they've completed. Under development, an example here of some of the dashboarding that we actually today do collect the data for. And to Marie's point, yes, this is the sort of thing that we will be building a BW cube in the background. That's essentially the database, which we will be able to have one from one of the survey tools, the other one from our learning management system, And you can see here we'll be able to slice and dice by organisation data such as country, such as function, employee data, which will include HRBPs assigned, the actual development solution and a time frame. Yes, the classic at the top, you can see here some of our population and participation statistics, how many solutions were available versus access and registrations versus completion, the kinds of thing most of us are quite familiar with today. Some distribution data with a top 10 and bottom 10, and that's so we know which learning investments are actually getting used. And that's partly to drive, not necessarily in terms of prediction, but what we do want to be able to do is go back and challenge the business and say, you have asked us to do virtual learning for everything or e-learning for everything or whatever the current industry darling is. But we will be able to have a more intelligent conversation with them and say, but we see those kinds of solutions are not being reported to add value, or learning from those solutions is not being applied on the job. Or yes, they're well received, but ultimately they're not applied. And as a next phase, we can start to look at xAPIs once we have our global transformation market starting to do this behaviour to track that in a more intelligent way and actually compare the two as well. So yes, appraisals, so we're asking, did they choose it? Did they like it? But then for me, where we really are starting to look at basic impact data, but still powerful impact data. Did they actually use it? And seeing the splits there, and did it add value? Now, in terms of learners providing feedback, those measures can be, and sometimes are for us, provided by just 2 survey clicks. So a star rating, as I said, at the end, and these application and added value measures are collected in the wording of a single question. Just pause there and see any questions or comments about that before I jump on to the next slide.
All good.
Cool. So behind the scenes, making it happen, I've touched on some of those as well. It does feel like this little guy pushing a big ball up a very big hill. We have multiple data sources, so you see we're collecting data before, during and after. So it's multiple sources at multiple moments, and obviously we're doing some calculations and comparisons. So we're saying what was the gap at the beginning, what was the gap at the end, where are we at now, calculating that. We are looking at, we have issues with alignment, so the data that we capture for employees in one system may not necessarily match exactly what we have in another, so we've already done some work directly with our vendors to address that. Quality, always an issue. We're doing a cleanup exercise right now. We have huge volumes. We are an organisation with 340,000 employees, and as I said, in one market alone they have 9,000 development solutions in their system. There is a cleanup exercise going on right now to actually run some sense checks over that. Also to map it to the strategic value, and by that I mean expected impact on individuals and teams, as well as the organisation, and that combination determines the scale and scope of survey questions that we ask, and that is assigned automatically. So there is no need at the time of selection for the learner to have any awareness of how we've categorised a development solution. It will automatically send them the right survey to complete. Many collaborators, I alluded to it before, we use a shared service to help us with these volumes and prepare data and administer our surveys. We've worked with our vendors, both Opinio, our survey provider at the moment, and Cornerstone to help make this happen, as well as our internal ISIT teams, L&D, the business, and automation as well to try and create or to generate some files automatically. And the background to that, we also, as I mentioned, developed a learning effectiveness framework. So they are the types of measures that we take. So we are inspired by Kirkpatrick, but we don't adhere to Kirkpatrick. I also said we don't apply, it's not a one size fits all. It's about 4 different types. So whether or not it's something as simple as an Excel course, we will measure quite simply, or all the way up to a coaching program or a leadership program, which we assess at a greater level of detail. And we had a hackathon, which was about bringing together that collection of professionals in the room. We spent 4 intense days saying, how can we industrialize this? How can we make it happen in a pragmatic way? And we actually went from saying we didn't have time to do certain things to agreeing what was the right solution. And that's, we came to the place where we will build BW cubes and use Webby actually for most of our reporting because of the way that it works and the data slices that it gives us. That's a quick look at our framework. I'll just run it up. Oh, it's a bit ugly, so I won't get too involved in all of that, but we can talk to that on another day. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but you can see it's designed with the classic Kirkpatrick. What does success look like at the top? And we consider how aligned it is at an organisation and business level. What results are we expecting? And you've seen examples of that there. In terms of organisation KPIs, we will look at correlation, not causation. By that I mean for our high investment programs where they're meant to be developing our leadership pipeline, we will look at the relationship between promotions, between talent retention, between key positions filled by succession plan, and the relationship between that and participation in certain programs to see if we see higher results from one community versus another. And if we don't, we have to ask why and what that investment actually is bringing us. So for me, even if certain programs are about reward and recognition, and we need to be honest about that, the question becomes, did they have, for example, Nespresso measures motivation of their employees or engagement. So whatever we are very honest about the purpose of a program, let's look at the relationship between participants and non-participants. Readiness is specific to some solutions, so we ask them about commitment and confidence before they leave so we can follow up immediately. And as a quick example where we've used that, we found our externally delivered programs had lower scores for that than our internal one. So we had a chat to our suppliers about what that was about and address that directly. And of course, we always care about reaction, always care about efficiency, and we'll start with reaction and move the other way when we're in the delivery or participation stage, depending on if I am a business person or an L&D person. Tableau's back. Do I have the ambition to incorporate other business tools, Salesforce, to check effect? Yes, in the fullness of time. To be honest, for me, this is about getting a seat at the table, but everybody sitting at the table. And by that, I mean L&D should not own Salesforce Analytics. What should happen is we should be working together with those teams to say what is the expected result. And by that, they're already measuring those analytics. So it's about putting those two pieces of information together. So it's not, in my opinion, for L&D to own that calculation. The business owns the business KPIs. The partnership piece is saying what should be the relationship between those business KPIs and certain development solutions. This is what I was referring to before in terms of how we apply scale and scope. You can see that this is an exercise that our markets are going through now, mapping all development solutions to one of these types or one of these quadrants. You see here a very brief overview of when we apply process or activities and measures. You can see we only look at things like alignment and readiness where we have high strategic value. So that's to make sure that we don't get survey fatigue or people don't just shut down and not give us feedback. Genuine capability shift and how it showed up in results. Absolutely. We had one the other week actually where somebody came to our international training centre. They left extremely inspired, having heard from our CEO and head of the operations function. They went back to their factory in France and they challenged a process that's the heat treatment of dairy, something that hasn't changed for about 40 years in our business, so a big challenge to status quo. They improved the process in terms of timeliness, reliability and cost in the vicinity of 50%. So it wasn't even just a capability shift, it was their capability shift in terms of leadership and driving change. They did that together or with the support of their line manager. The success is such that they're now trialling that in other factories in the business and they're actually targeting another 50% improvement as well. respond to other ones later. So to the point, decisions and actions based on intelligence, we've done vendor follow-up directly. We've evolved development solutions. So in terms of if we're seeing particular objectives, we're receiving feedback that said it's not really aligned to goals anymore, and we anticipate that. We need to move as closely as we can to the speed of business. So our capability needs change just as our business priorities change. And so now we are getting some feedback loops about that. Rather than diving into low satisfaction scores, we're getting direct feedback about alignment up front. The modalities that we use, sometimes we've had feedback that they want, which seems obvious, but in some instances they might want more theory, some instances they might want more hands-on. In terms of enablers, sometimes people say the learning was great, but I had difficulty applying it on the job. There was something missing, and so we're able to respond to those things with the cohort reporting, as well as make sure that we are more proactive with future cohorts. I gave an example before of how we've been able to create tangible links between and create little videos where people go, I came, I heard this, I learned this, I went back, this is the change that I made, and here's the business impact. So we're able to capture what we call success stories. And we're working on using this information as part of our future training plan preparation. So to say, not only, we're not just going to respond to what you ask, we're actually going to respond as well to what we see in terms of what actually happens. So we'll be able to look at which development solutions are delivering results and make sure we continue to promote and deploy those, as well as review, renovate, remove those that aren't actually giving results. But also, using our standardized approach, we'll be able to compare communities and see, is this something that works well in Asia but it's not working well in the US? Or are we getting certain results in one part of our business and not another? And to be honest, because we don't have a standardized approach today, that isn't something that we know. So we also plan to leverage insight and experience across our whole organization as well. From a business speaker, from business perspective, we're leveraging success. I gave examples, and we're increasing engagement with the business involvement. Sorry for that rush. Final thoughts, I'll just let you have a 2-second read because we need to move forward.
Thank you, Vanessa. And look, the slides will be available on the, that's all right, web page there. So, Sarojit, over to you and take your time.
All right, thank you, Jivan. And I think this is a good timing, transitioning from something specific to something generic. Good afternoon, all. And today I'm going to cover, how to apply the analytics discipline to learning and development. So I'm a people analytics professional, and I see everything from an analytics lens. So let's start with that. I will take you through a couple of quotes, and in the interest of time, I might rush through a couple of slides as well. Right? The world's most valuable resource is no longer oil, but data. What does it mean? It means that at some point of time in history, the oil drove the industries. Now it's the data which makes organizations efficient and deliver services and products in a more efficient manner. If we have data, let's look at the data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. I mean, it tells about, we have to transition from opinions to data, right? And for that, not only we need to capture data effectively, but also to be able to use them to answer our questions and get over opinions. Opinions are important, but only after we have the data through which we can see the patterns and make sense out of it. We all know that the data is growing exponentially. In the last 2 years, we have generated more data than what we have generated in the history of our existence, right? And given we have started producing data through all the photos that we capture, the smartphones, the text, and from an organization context, the tools like Yammer, which is used for collaborations. and many other means, right? And organizations have started to capture actually a lot of their data, started analyzing data captured in things like email and Outlook to see networks and how it is influencing the organization's efficiency, effectiveness, and its top line and bottom line end of the day. All right, so and this is my perspective based on my understanding of what's happening, and we might be or might not be aligned, but I guess that you would agree on most of my observations, right? So in much of the organization, much effort goes into creating reports, because we have been creating reports in past based on the systems capability that we had, right? And we use that for doing all our checking and validations and things like that, right? But you'd agree that the reports, because of the level of details it captures, does not give us the critical insights that is needed for us to make decisions, right? Whether to start a new activity or end some existing activity, from a learning standpoint, what new learning courses we have to start, what courses are not working, right? If we go into too much of granularity, we miss out the big picture. Dashboards are important, but I think dashboards needs to adapt itself to the changing business needs, right? If, let's say, the business needs of a organization which is making profit versus another one whose focus is to improve their profitability are very different. So we should be measuring different things, right? As the business changes, we have to adapt the dashboard, and that applies to all areas, including learning and development. For example, what kind of learning programs are we tracking? What are we tracking in the learning programs? In some places where the uptake of a learning program is slow, we might need to track the learning hours that needs to be tracked, right? But in other places, it might not be learning hours that are important. If, let's say, certain learning programs are not able to deliver the promise of performance, then we have to track, or we have to connect the dots between the learning hours and the performance of individuals, and we can have different ways of capturing the outcome of a learning program through surveys or some other means, but then that could be the requirement. So the dashboards needs to adapt based on the changes in the business or in the expectations. And there is a widespread misconception about reporting versus analytics. The discipline of analytics requires asking the right question and trying to find out the answer to that question through multiple investigation. And for investigation, we have the data with us, right? So it is not reporting, it is not dashboard, it is more than that. But of course, the analytics itself requires the reports and dashboard as a tool to reach our finding and conclusion. So another area what I have seen, including in my past organization and current organization, is within the HR community, there is a huge amount of focus on whether we are performing our services well enough or not, whether we are improving the participation rate of let's say learning programs or not, things like that. So while the HR efficiency is important, whatever we are delivering, it's important that we deliver them well, but then ultimately we have to connect it to why are we delivering that, right? Whether it makes sense to continue delivering what we are delivering or not, right? So some questions we can ask ourselves is, what is the organizational learning needs in the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, that means short term or long term, and try to answer such kind of questions, whether we have the learning programs that is aligned to the business objective or not, right? We need to find out, for example, whether the cost of learning vendors, there are opportunity for reduction in the cost or not, right? Whether there are certain learning vendors where the cost is high but the outcome is low, right? So it is possible that we might be doing things very well, but it might not be yielding results. So the question here is that, are we asking the right question, right? So if you ask the right question, of course, it starts the the approach of finding the answer. All right, and I will try answering the question, Pablo, after I've gone through the slides in the interest of time. So what should be the approach? So, all organizations, including ours, we are sitting on a mine of data, right? So we need to start making sense of the existing data. And while I say making sense, it is not about just reporting on one dimension, which is like the number of learners, the number of hours learned, and things like that. But also we need to start correlating data. So we can start correlating between the learning hours spent and the performance between in a certain group, and things like that. So that is like identifying trend using which we can take actions. We can look into newer ways of capturing data, and this is the field of big data, right? We have a lot of tools to make sense of structured data, for example, performance scores versus the learning hours and things like that. But there are opportunities in which we can look into unstructured data as well. For example, in a performance appraisal, all the comments that is captured by the manager. So how much are we making sense out of it? And in fact, a lot of the important information are captured in unstructured data. And we have, analytics disciplines such as data scraping, word cloud, and things like that, through which we can make sense of the unstructured data.
So, Sarojit, sorry, just to jump in terms of unstructured data, because that seems to be increasing, whether it's kind of Yammer chat or, other collaboration spaces. How do you, I guess you can get all the data because it exists in a database somewhere. But how realistic is it to actually kind of join all the pipes to get that data?
Yeah, see, there are tools. For example, you can use tools like R, Python. They have modules to do data scraping and things like that. So actually, from an organization context, it's much easier. I mean, there are ways in which we can scrape data through internet, websites, and Twitter, and things like that. And if, let's say, the tools can do that, in an organization context where we have the data in a database, downloading them into an Excel file and running those algorithms through them is actually much easier, right? So it's possible and practical, actually.
Sure.
Yeah. And of course, the last and important part is that how do we use our technology and tools to predict? And I'll just take my thoughts a little bit deeper into the next couple of slides. Again, in the conscious of time. So when we talk about prediction, we are talking about identifying the variables which can have an impact on the outcome. For example, if we say that if we connect learning to performance, performance is the outcome, and the learning programs, it can be learning programs, it's the profile of the learner, it is the learning hours. There could be multiple variables that can in fact impact the outcome, right? So we start with correlating with what of those factors can have impact on the outcome, and what is the materiality of the impact. There could be hundreds of data which can have impact on the outcome, but we have to figure out, what are those 5 or 6 or 10 max variables which can have a sizable impact on the outcome. Then, since we have a lot of data in the organization, we can run those algorithms to find out the pattern in the data, right? Using the factors that we have identified could have impact on the outcome, right? And that is called learning. And we use machine learning to do learning of the algorithm in the existing data, and then we predict, using a new set of data. We try to predict, what is going to happen and validate whether that's really happening or not, right? So this is the whole science and art of prediction. Why it is art? Because just there is a correlation between factors and the outcome. It does not say that it's causing that outcome, right? So there is a human element in which we have to interpret the results and try to make sense whether the prediction is making sense or not. So there is an art part of it, and there is of course a science part of it. So let me take you through one prediction scenario, which is what learning curriculum would be effective for a candidate who is recently promoted to a leadership role in a particular country, in a particular business line, in a certain function, and having certain years of experience. So we know that there is a learner's profile. We have recently promoted this person to a leadership role, and we want this person to perform well in the new role, right? So we have to take this person through a learning curriculum. And to answer this question, this is a business problem. To answer this question, we can use the machine learning and predict, the whole approach of prediction to scan through, similar kind of cases in past and try to make sense what kind of curriculum actually provided the performance and competence that's required, right? All right, and I think the slides will be given to you. There are a couple of thoughts in which the prediction could be possible, but mostly it is to identify learning programs which is very individualized, right? So it is to by observing the trend of the high performers in the organization, what learning path they took, what are the exposure they had, what kind of roles they performed, and things like that. We can predict what would be the likely performance of this person who is promoted or assigned to a critical role or leadership position and things like that. And here's my final thoughts. Learning is one component, and I agree with Vanessa's observation. So it is one of the component of the entire domain of HR, and sometimes learning may not be the right approach. It would be, or it could be a complementary approach to other approaches as well. For example, succession planning and learning, performance management and learning. Sometimes it could be a decision between whether to hire in a particular role or develop within the organization. So sometimes, we have questions which requires an interdisciplinary approach, where we have to bring all the knowledge together and then try to answer that question, which actually impact the final business outcome. With that, I haven't left you, Jeevan, with much time to wrap it up. And I'm not too sure whether we have enough time to go through the question and answer session as well. So,
sure. Thank you very much. Look, I think I'm just going to rush through actually. Just give you one slide as to why analytics is important. And I think this slide is key, where we're saying that the learning world that we've built is actually around mandatory learning, right? Compliance, completions, etc. And it's quite easy to track on LMSs. But there's more unstructured discretionary learning happening, which is very difficult to track, and that's where I think we are finding the challenge with analytics is how do we capture that data that exists in so many different places. To give you an idea as to how many different places they kind of live in, is one of the slides that's kind of coming up is this slide here. This is probably where I finish. Is that you've got lots of, so on the axis you've got formality, so which is informal and formal learning, and sources internal to the organization and external to the organization. The one that's dotted is the one that we live in, right? So this is your LMS classroom courses, performance support tools, surveys, etc. Right? So this is kind of the control environment we are in, and we can get data from these. But there's a huge amount of things that are happening outside of the formal internal channels. So there's learning happening in external sources like MOOCs, membership in professional bodies, social media, HPR. Also informally within organizations, internally, internet, wiki, job activities, discussions, etc. Right? So essentially our analytics at the moment are confined to the top left square, and where we are struggling is how to incorporate the slides, the activities there. So I think this is the challenge, that we have. And I think this is kind of where we'll finish. But, like I said, this is probably a two-part webinar. So I really want to thank Vanessa and Sarojit for sharing their thoughts. Hopefully you can join again for our next webinar. We will be online for some more time if you want to ask us some questions. There is a poll in front of you in terms of giving us feedback. So if you can just do that, that'll be fantastic. But I think this is where we finish. So thank you everyone. Vanessa, thank you very much. Sarajit, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.